Food is fuel for your body, your mind, and definitely your sport. But let's face it, nutrition is confusing, and the expectations on girls and women to be thin and have a six-pack are exhausting. If you've ever been frustrated with your body, confused about nutrition, obsessed with eating healthy, or guilty when you don't, underate, overate, or overtrained, and overwhelmed with all the pressure, then this podcast is for you. Nutrition can be easy. You can take control of it, but it might start with letting go of control by asking for help and making a change. I'm Lindsay Elizabeth Cortez, sports dietitian and owner of Rise Up Nutrition, where I empower female athletes to overcome nutrition concerns and perform at their highest level, to stop being confused by all the mixed or harmful messages, and finally have confidence in your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete. Hello, everybody. It's Lindsay Elizabeth Cortez, of course. We have had a really long stretch of having some amazing guests on this podcast that I have been interviewing. We've had athletes, other dietitians, coaches, experts, clients. Even all the past episodes these past 2 months have been super fun for me to record. But now I am back with just a solo episode, just me, just you and me today, a little bit of Lindsay time. And yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with the interviews. I hope you have too. By the way, I'm always open to feedback. If you want to leave me a review on your podcast listening channels, Apple Podcasts, or send me a message on Instagram or an email, which I will include in the show notes. I'd love to hear what you guys want to hear more of, more interviews or solo episodes. But anyways, going back to today, this solo episode, I kind of wanted to do this because, like I said, it's been a long stretch of interviews. And what was really interesting is that during that time, I actually got COVID. Yes, in early February, I came down with the virus, my husband and I, even though we have been pretty safe for the past year. He is exposed to some people at work, and that's where we are assuming we got it from. But anyways, if you noticed in some of my episodes, if I sounded kind of nasally or not super engaged, a little under the weather, my energy not being 100% there, that's because some of the episodes that I recorded recently were while I was sick. Of course, I do everything virtually, so that was fine. But with that being said, I'm fully recovered. And so today I thought I would share with you some insights just to what I dealt with when I had COVID and how I fueled and trained and recovered and I'm coming back. And the reason I'm doing this is clearly not because I'm an expert in this novel disease at all, but actually just because it led to some interesting conversations with my clients about how we take care of our bodies. One of my clients recently told me that she was so impressed with me that I kept eating when I had COVID, because this particular client was of the mindset that when you don't train hard, you don't need as much energy, which, as I told her, and as she now is learning from me, since she's a client of mine, that's false. That's not true. In fact, quite the opposite. When you are fighting off a sickness or a virus, your energy needs are often increased. Or just because you're not doing exercise, they certainly don't drastically decrease, because as a reminder, we don't just eat to exercise. We don't just eat to train. It doesn't matter how high level of an athlete you are. You don't just eat to train. You eat to be a human first. You eat to live. You eat to survive. You eat for everything that your body is doing internally first. And then you eat even more, or without whatever is left over is what you get to use externally through sport and through exercise. So anyways, like I said, it led to some interesting conversations. So I thought, let me just share some of my personal insights and lessons that I learned when I had COVID. And yeah, I'll start with just talking about it. But of course, before I go any further, I want to disclose that, again, I'm not an expert in COVID. I am not an epidemiologist. I'm not a physician. I'm definitely not giving you any treatment or medical guidance on this podcast. Please do not interpret it that way. I am just somebody who experienced it myself, and I read a few research articles online, and I made some correlations with my own experiences. So, yeah, obviously with such little research and it being a new disease, there's not a definitive treatment for COVID, but we do know that it definitely affects our respiratory system. So many people describe shortness of breath, labored breathing, dry cough, productive cough, difficulty in expectoration, and all of that I experienced. Actually, it started for me just with fatigue. It was a Friday. I went for a run in the morning, and that run in particular was rather difficult. I think I even stopped to walk, which I allowed myself to do, even though I knew it was unusual. I was just like, oh, what the heck's happening? I think it was a Friday. I figured it was a long week, but I made it through the run. I came home for the rest of the day, and I was working and doing client calls, and I just felt myself fading and just getting really fatigued. I do have a stand-up desk in my home office. I don't use it 100% of the time, that's for sure. I am often found sitting, but I remember that day specifically, I didn't use it at all. I sat the entire day. I was just tired. The next day I was supposed to go for a run, but I vocalized to my husband, I don't think I'm feeling good. I think I need to rest some more. So I took the day off. I was very in tune with my body. And then came Sunday, which I was thinking, well, Sunday was supposed to be a rest day, but I took Saturday as a rest day. So I think on my training plan, it was supposed to be like, I think a 6 or an 8 mile run. And I kind of knew I wasn't feeling good. So I decided, let me just go out for a 3 mile jog. And if I'm feeling good, I'll keep going. But, I didn't kind of started with a 3 mile loop. And yeah, I made it about a mile. And then I was like, this is not right. Something's wrong, because it was my breathing was just off and my legs just felt dead tired. And it was hard. I'm not going to lie. It was hard to stop that. I ran about a mile and then stopped and walked back. And yeah, I felt a bit defeated, but by the next morning, Monday morning, things had progressed. And that's when I realized, okay, we are really sick. And we went in for testing, and yeah, eventually then we know the story from there is it was positive. It was COVID. So it's really, I think, lesson learned here of allowing yourself, no matter what your training plan is, being in tune with your body, not just jumping to beating yourself up for having to stop or take it easy or change the plan, really being in tune. If your body is tired, it's telling you something. Your body is telling you something, and you've got to listen to that. So, I'm pretty proud of that first weekend. Maybe I could have jumped to getting tested sooner, but I think I did pretty good there with recognizing, being in tune with my body, allowing myself to rest, and taking those signs and symptoms seriously. From there, like I mentioned, that Monday is when things progressed. And what it progressed to is more total body fatigue and also sinuses, which I haven't heard too many people really complain of sinus pressure. Maybe I haven't talked to enough people, but I really struggled with massive sinus pressure, congestion. The cough came a few days later, but I absolutely was having lots of congestion and mucus and sinus problems. And then came the brain fog, which was the most difficult thing for me. Maybe it was just complete fatigue, but since I do virtual work, I was still meeting with a lot of my clients, all my clients virtually, and I really struggled mentally to think clearly. I was struggling to complete full sentences. I was struggling to complete full thoughts. My brain would just kind of stop, and I couldn't complete a thought. And that's why I joked, if you're paying super close attention to a few of my podcast episodes over the past few weeks, there's a few of them where maybe my questions aren't my finest moments, or I'm just not bringing the energy quite the same, because I definitely struggled to think clearly. By the time that my sinuses started improving, interestingly, that's when I noticed that I did lose my smell and taste as well. But a lot of people, when you're sick and you have like a cough or you have sinus problems, you can't taste food that great anyways, but it did come stronger about a week into this is when I lost my taste and smell. And it definitely made eating challenging. And this is why, I was sharing this with my clients along the way of, I am just eating because I know I have to. I'm not eating, I'm not using food as fuel for my performances because I'm not doing anything physically. I'm not eating for enjoyment because quite frankly, I don't taste it and I'm not enjoying it. And it's not fun for me to eat because I don't like it and everything feels difficult and I'm having shortness of breath. So spending time to put food in my mouth and chew was actually making breathing more difficult. It was difficult. I don't want to downplay how hard it can be for some people to eat when they're sick, but it is important. Remember what I said earlier. We are fighting a virus off. We are fighting something off and you need energy to do that. So what was I eating? I had bagels in the house that week. I was just eating plain bagels or 2 bagels or 3 bagels in a day because it's really all I wanted. I had some soup for sure. I had orange juice. So some liquid energy was helpful. What else did I have? Just bread, some crackers, and then I'm not even going to lie about this, candy. When suddenly I finally did get some appetite, what did I have an appetite for? It was straight candy. And for those of you who know me, I do have a sweet tooth, but it's an ice cream tooth specifically. Next up would be a chocolate tooth. So it's really bizarre for me to get I had a craving for licorice and I had a craving for those gummy, chewy orange slices with the sugar on them. Yeah, that's another thing I had a craving for. I think that was my body telling me, you need energy, you need carbs, you need sugar, just haven't gotten enough energy in. And that's what happens when we're low on energy. We crave sweets. We crave sweets and sugar because it's what will increase our blood sugar the fastest or get that energy into our muscles the fastest. So sure, after, having COVID and being sick, and even though I was trying to keep up with my energy, I was eating mostly carbs, meaning I probably needed some proteins and fats, but my body still craved more sugar because that's what your body craves when you need more energy. So I allowed myself to go get that, knowing I should probably have some hard-boiled eggs, but no, my body is craving candy, licorice of all things. And I think another reason licorice hit the spot is because you either love licorice or you hate it. Personally, I've always loved it, but it is such a strong flavor. And I think coming off of not being able to taste anything for a while, I was craving something with just this strong, just something really powerful that could kind of get any spark in my taste buds. And that's what I was craving. That's what I allowed myself to have. Ongoing symptoms was as I had my loss of taste and smell, the fatigue really was ongoing throughout this time. And it probably took me a full 2 weeks. It was just about 2 weeks from that onset of fatigue that by the way, I wasn't doing anything exercise-wise during this time. I think I got the dogs out for a couple of super short walks, but my dogs are really rather challenging. So they're really exhausting. So I actually didn't, it would have been good in hindsight. It would have been good to do a 15-minute walk slowly every day, but the dogs are challenging. So I really didn't get that in because they wipe me out. Walking with them is not easy. So I really rested. I really allowed myself to sit. My exercise was walking up and down the stairs, and it took a full 2 weeks. But I will say that 2 weeks later, it was kind of miraculous that I woke up, I started doing some client calls, and I just halfway through the day thought, wow, I'm thinking more clearly. The brain fog is gone. And I also thought, I have energy. I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like I can stand. I can use my stand-up desk. It was really amazing how fast within a day, I was like, wow, I feel good. So that night, I actually did a little, at-home workout with my husband. He did more of a workout, but I was like, I'm going to do something. I'm going to move, but I'm mostly just going to stretch and do some body weight things. That's what I did. And I was really quite surprised with how good I felt. So the next day we thought we could go for a jog together, understanding that it would be slow and rebuilding. And that's where I realized though, that the shortness of breath was still sticking around, even though my muscles felt like they had energy, even though my brain fog was lifted, even though my sinuses were cleared and I could breathe and my taste and smell was coming back. When I went for this run, it wasn't just, I haven't run in 2 weeks and, it might take me a while to come back. It was truly something in my breath and in my chest that didn't feel normal. So this is the shortness of breath that I think is of concern, and what I want anybody who might be exposed to COVID to proceed with caution. So, like I mentioned, we do know that COVID does affect our respiratory system. And ultimately, when you look into the research about it, what's happening is patients with COVID-19 are showing alveoli injury. So that's injury to the tiny little air sacs of the lungs where a gas exchange occurs. So the interstitial changes are really the major mechanism where we see impaired oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. And of course, since there's injury there, there's inflammation as well. So all of this makes breathing more difficult, and that will put more labor on your heart to try and manage this, right? You have to remember that your lungs having the oxygen exchange, and your lungs are a muscle. And when you do breathe in oxygen, then your heart has to pump that oxygen throughout your body. So we're seeing increased heart rate as well. So you're just not having as good of oxygen and CO2 exchange. And then your heart has to do more work to try and compensate and get that whatever oxygen you have delivered throughout your body. So this is both at rest and of course during exertion. So that's where, even though I felt after 2 weeks of resting, I felt normal at rest, when I attempted to exert myself, it was very difficult. And there's other research showing that there's decreased heart rate variability post-COVID. So we know that's kind of showing us that our fitness level is not up to par with decreased heart rate variability. So, all this to say that, even a mild case of COVID-19, mild meaning, at home, no pneumonia manifestations, able to fully recover at home and otherwise healthy, pulmonary rehab of sorts could be really important to strengthen your lung capacity, improve gas exchange, and, just control your heart rate. So, I didn't really do this at the time. This is all in hindsight, and I'm kind of going off of my experiences, but there's probably more that I should have done. I mean, I did do a little bit, but there's probably more I should have done to take care of my lungs and try to rebuild my lung strength. There's been some research in 2020, and I'm sure more in 2021, about pulmonary rehab for the treatment of COVID-19 patients. And they show that diaphragmatic breathing could be helpful. So predominantly engaging your diaphragm while minimizing the action of accessory muscles could be important. Breathing through your nose, so nasal inspiration, that helps facilitate the recruitment of the diaphragm and enhance humidification within your lungs. And active abdominal muscle contraction employed at the end of expiration or letting the air out will help increase abdominal pressure, push your diaphragm up, and really be more favorable. So there's real stuff. After you listen to this podcast, if you're interested, if you've never heard of diaphragmatic breathing, I actually would really strongly encourage you to look into that. This can be extremely helpful for athletes, extremely helpful for runners, and of course, in something like this. I did do this, not really consciously, but as my 2 weeks of kind of building myself back up post-COVID, after that first run where I attempted and I was like, wow, yeah, something's wrong with my breathing, I did make an intentional effort to do more yoga. I'm naturally a yogi. I do yoga, but I kind of, in place of these workouts, knowing I can't just jump right back into my workouts, let me do some more yoga with some more breathing, including diaphragmatic breathing techniques. And in fact, there's been other research on COVID to support yoga, which helps basically coordinate breathing along with arm lifts and body positioning to help with your inhale and your exhale. There's a specific technique called pranayama, which is really controlling your breath and synchronizing movements. So, some people just like licorice, some people either love licorice or hate it, and people either love yoga or hate it. But even if you hate it, I would challenge you to consider its benefits to improve your lung capacity and breathing capacity, especially if you, and I hope you don't, but if you do come down with COVID yourself, take time off as you need to, but consider doing some diaphragmatic breathing or some yoga exercises as your rehab throughout COVID to take care of yourself. Again, this research does say that you while you actively have COVID, I think I did things wrong where I just kind of like took 2 weeks off completely. They are saying that doing 10 to 15 minutes of breathing technique and breathing exercises a day will help you. And that might help you so that, throughout your recovery, you maybe don't have the same experience I did where I just attempted to go for a run after, and that wasn't so smart. So consider those breathing exercises. Ultimately, I am here to say I didn't do things perfectly, but I wanted to share my insights and some of the research that I've learned since then. And ultimately, my advice, not medical guidance, once again, but advice would be, if you do have COVID or somebody who has COVID, make sure that they know to take care of themselves. Rest, decrease your exercise. Research does show that 10 minutes a day of a light walk or light bike ride with a very controlled heart rate, not exerting yourself at all, might help. And especially if you are just paying attention to your breathing and doing some of these pulmonary rehab exercises or yoga or diaphragmatic breathing to help strengthen those lungs, the diaphragm, alveoli, and improve oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. Now, let's focus on nutrition because, as I mentioned before, just because you're decreasing exercise certainly does not mean you should be decreasing your energy intake. You should probably, because your appetite might be thrown off, intentionally try to increase your intake. And that's exactly what I did. My appetite was thrown off, so I had to intentionally say, I'm not eating this bagel because I want to. I'm eating this bagel because I need to, because I need to keep my energy up, because the fatigue I was experiencing was draining, and you need to keep your energy up to fight off this virus. So eat whatever you can. But I also want to highlight some nutrients that are of interest throughout COVID and the research that's been going on. Some nutrients of interest include vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, and vitamin C. Now, with all of these things, this does not mean that if you get COVID, you should start supplementing with all of these. I do not want you to take what I say today into megadosing with supplements. That's the exact opposite of what I want you to do. What I want you to do is, if you don't have COVID, I want you to make sure that you are getting daily intake of these nutrients consistently to improve your day-to-day nutrition. Because with most just infections and diseases and viruses, with most things, nutrition really works as a preventative medicine. It works wonderfully as preventative medicine. So in the case of vitamin C, if you have really good vitamin C status, it's less likely that you'll get sick if exposed to a bacteria. And that's the case with all of these things, is that the better your nutrition is day to day, the less susceptible you will be to certain diseases or infectious diseases, or the shorter your recovery time will be. So let's just dive into a few of them. Vitamin D. Vitamin D's role in COVID-19 is not completely unexpected because there's been a lot of research on vitamin D recently to show just how important it is in a multitude of conditions and bodily processes, and including respiratory diseases. So there have been some observational studies that report independent associations between low serum vitamin D status and your susceptibility to acute respiratory tract infections, not specific to COVID, but just respiratory tract infections. We've seen vitamin D deficiency associated with an increased risk of respiratory distress syndrome, intensive care admission, and mortality in patients with pneumonia. So there's definitely a correlation between vitamin D status and respiratory diseases. Correlation, not causation. Remember that. We also know that vitamin D's benefits when it does come to supplementation are most protective against those who are starting with a very low vitamin D status. So again, this is not reason to say that everybody needs to start supplementing with vitamin D. But it is something to consider. It's March, so hopefully wherever you're listening to this, at least here in America, we're heading into our summer months with more vitamin D, but you're coming off of a winter where you probably didn't get exposed to much vitamin D. And this is because, if you didn't know, vitamin D, our biggest source of it, is actually from the sun. It is a vitamin, but it's actually in our bodies more like a hormone. This is why vitamin D has so many roles in our health, because you make it. The sun hits your skin and you have the vitamin D precursor within your body, and the sun converts it to vitamin D. So you make it from the sun, and that's your best source of it. So as the weather gets warmer, wherever you are, be sure to go outside and bump up your vitamin D levels with some natural sunlight. In the meantime, you can start to focus on your food sources of vitamin D. Our biggest source is going to be fish. Salmon is pretty high in it. Could be canned salmon, fresh salmon, wild, farm raised. It could be smoked salmon. Some other fish that's a good source is swordfish, trout, tilapia, halibut. We also have a little bit of vitamin D in some mushrooms, notably cremini mushrooms or portobello mushrooms. And then it's mostly going to be in some fortified products. So fortified milk, all milk here in the US is fortified with vitamin D. And that does include some alternatives, but you do have to look at the label. So if we're doing almond milk, cashew milk, oat milk, soy milk, you do have to look on the label to ensure it's in there, because it's not, by regulation, it's not necessarily in there. All cow's milk by regulation must have vitamin D in it, but it's not the same for your non-dairy alternatives. So be sure to look at that label and make sure that you're getting a source of vitamin D if you're using a non-dairy alternative. That's really it. Honestly, there's a tiny bit of vitamin D in eggs. You can get fortified cereals like Total Nutrition cereal. You can get fortified orange juice, but fish and milk is going to be your main source. Another nutrient of interest is magnesium. Magnesium is a mineral that is involved in hundreds of enzymatic reactions within your body, including within your immune system and inflammatory system. There is some research to say that chronic magnesium deficiency might result in increased oxidative stress and low-grade inflammation, which may be linked to age-related diseases and a higher predisposition for infectious diseases, especially in an older population. So there's certainly some research reporting associations of magnesium deficiency with viral and bacterial infections that indicate a possible role of magnesium deficiency in coronavirus. So again, do we need to start supplementing? No, but let's focus on some magnesium foods. Magnesium is really high in some of our leafy greens like spinach and kale and Swiss chard. It's also high in some seeds like pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, flax seeds, beans and whole grains. So this could be kidney beans, chickpeas, black-eyed peas, whole grains like brown rice or whole wheat bread. A few other magnesium sources, nuts like almonds, Brazil nuts, cashews, and of course my favorite, dark chocolate. That's my favorite source of magnesium. So those are some foods to focus on throughout this time and make sure that you have a good baseline of magnesium intake throughout your week. Okay, let's move on to zinc. Zinc, another mineral that plays a huge role in our immune system. There's some research to say that individuals with zinc deficiency are also at increased risk for severe SARS outcomes. And so multiple studies support the potential benefits of zinc for COVID-19 patients as well. Zinc has antiviral properties, and it has an ability to generate innate and acquired immune responses. So zinc is another important one to consider. And again, focusing on just our daily intake of zinc, we're going to find it in a lot of our higher protein foods, meat specifically. Beef is a good source of it, whether it's ground chuck, steak, burgers. Oysters, actually incredibly high. Some seafood, clams, crab, lobster. That's a really high source of zinc. And then some of our darker meats, even if it is poultry like chicken or turkey, we're looking for that darker meat. So chicken legs or drumsticks, pork chops, roast duck could be good. And if you are not a meat lover, then some zinc foods to focus on would be soybeans and soy products like tofu and tempeh. and some lentils as well. Okay, our last nutrient of interest is vitamin C. This is, very common to think of vitamin C when you have a cold or some sort of infection. And we're seeing some research in COVID-19 as well. So vitamin C can prevent and alleviate viral and bacterial infections. Notably, vitamin C can reduce the length of your infection. So when we look at some studies done in the hospital, I have one in front of me, actually, a meta-analysis of 12 trials with over 1,700 patients calculated that vitamin C reduced the length of intensive care unit stays on average by 8%. And another meta-analysis found that vitamin C shortens the duration of mechanical ventilation in ICU patients. So ultimately, we're just seeing that vitamin C might have a positive effect on acute respiratory symptoms. And this should be considered in COVID-19 care as well. And vitamin C, again, it's just something to make sure that you're getting a regular daily dose of. We know that it's in orange juice, or at least most people think of orange juice for their vitamin C. But I want to remind you of a few other foods that might surprise you. Strawberries are an amazing source. Bell pepper and broccoli are an amazing source of vitamin C. Some of our other greens like Brussels sprouts and kale. Of course, our other fruits like kiwi, guava, papaya, pineapple, more of those citrus fruits and tropical fruits can be pretty high in them. And then here's one for you, tomatoes. Tomatoes are really high in vitamin C, and more so when you think about concentrating that down to something like tomato sauce or marinara sauce, then you can get some really high vitamin C intakes. So I hope that this was interesting to listen to. If nothing else, one more time, I do want to say that, these were just my personal experiences, and this podcast was not giving you any medical advice. And COVID-19 coronavirus is obviously a pandemic, a novel new virus. We need more research. We don't have enough. But I wanted to share my personal experience if that helps anybody out. And I wanted to share some tips about nutrition and training. I think, number one message here is that nutrition works great as preventative medicine. So do make sure that you are paying attention to your nutrition in the sense that you are getting a variety of nutrients, a variety of vitamins and minerals. In particular, we might want to bring extra attention to things like vitamin D, magnesium, zinc, and vitamin C on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis to make sure that we have all the nutrients we need to reduce our susceptibility to infections or to help us fight off an infection when we do get it, right? Even the healthiest of people can get sick. So it'll just help you recover faster. So number one, use nutrition as preventative medicine. Number two, if you do happen to get sick, be wise enough to allow your body that rest. Keep eating. Know that just because you're not training doesn't mean that you do not deserve fuel. You absolutely deserve and need fuel. And you also need this rest if you do want to get back at it as quickly as possible. My number three advice is to recover slowly, and specific to coronavirus and COVID. Pay extra attention to that shortness of breath. It is a real thing. It's not just you being out of shape from taking 2 or 3 weeks off. It is literally inflammation of the lungs and an impaired oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. So really proceed with caution and maybe consider some of those breathing exercises, low intensity work, yoga to ease yourself back into things. I am now 6 weeks out. I took 2 weeks completely off when I was really feeling COVID. And then I took 2 weeks of trying to rebuild my strength, which was very slow, working on that breathing, working on just, moving my body. And then I've had 2 weeks of following a more structured training plan, overall feeling better, but, rehabbing myself or rebuilding myself after over a month off, right? So I'm not jumping right back into exactly what I was doing in January. So just allowing yourself to recover slowly and really be cautious of the effects that COVID might have had on your breathing and your heart rate and your lung capacity. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Female Athlete Nutrition Podcast. I will include links in the show notes to references and sources to back up things that I was saying today. But of course, if you think you have COVID, this little podcast isn't going to be your solution. Be sure that you get yourself tested, go seek medical attention, follow CDC guidelines, and do everything you can to just take care of yourself and protect yourself. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that episode, and thanks for listening. But before I let you go, I have free resources that you can have access to right away, right now, so that you can start fueling your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete. First, I have your Red S recovery race. If you've ever wondered if you might be struggling with Red S, curious to learn more, or know you have Red S and are looking to recover fast, then you can head to www.riseupnutritionrun.com/RedS and download the Red S Recovery Race. See how you place and figure out the next steps to recovery. Plus, while there, I have a few other great resources for you, including 3 nutrition secrets that every elite athlete swears by, and access to our private Facebook community, Female Athlete Nutrition. So again, to gain access to all of this, head to riseupnutritionrun.com/RedS. That's /REDS. And you can gain access and get the help you need fast. Too many girls and women and female athletes struggle with nutrition, but you don't have to any longer. Become fierce, fit, and fueled. Links in the show notes, and I'll see you next time.